Moving on to the 12-mark question, let's get started with this. So with reference to extract C and your own knowledge, discuss methods the UK government could use to increase tax revenue. Okay, so first things first, the first thing that comes to my mind is we're talking about tax revenue, we're talking about increasing tax revenue. The first literal thing that comes to mind is the Laffer Curve. Now, this is genuinely one of the best evaluation points, definitely up there as an A-star evaluation point, and especially if you know some application to back it up. I think I might have taught it once before in one of the past papers, but if you know how to apply that to the real world, if you know how to apply the Laffer Curve to the UK, you can really pick up some top marks. So let's get that drawn out. Even though that would just be an evaluation point in this paragraph, it is still an absolute killer diagram. And so, of course, what is on the axis? On our x-axis, we have tax rate, and on our y-axis, we have tax revenue. When I'm marking papers, this is the main time, or marking essays, this is the main mistake I see with the Laffer Curve. You need to remember, on both axes it's tax, but on your x-axis it's the tax rate, and on your y-axis is the tax revenue. And of course, just looks like a, I don't know, like an upside down U. But of course, the main thing that the Laffer Curve does show that an increase in tax rate past the optimum will actually lead to a decrease in tax revenue. And of course, when we're increasing tax rate, we want to increase tax revenue, and this shows the opposite can happen. So it shows it acts as a really good evaluation point. But anyway, let's get back on to the question. So with reference to extract C, discuss methods the UK government could use to increase tax revenue. So very simply, as this diagram would show as well, if we want to increase tax revenue, what do we need to do? We need to increase the tax rate. So that is going to be probably what I base both my paragraphs off. Increasing tax rate. So what type of taxes could we increase? So things like corporation tax, income tax, even things like, I think a really good paragraph would also be VAT, so increasing value added tax. So now you could literally get away with just doing these, and you could 100% get 12 out of 12 marks with just this. So just picking two of these three, so maybe corporation tax and VAT, and just talking about how we increase them, develop the chain of analysis, how that will lead to an increase in tax revenue. But also, since we have both of these on here together, what does this show? So I'm going to label 3 points. So blue point, purple point, and red point. So also, what's another method we can get an increase in tax revenue by? So one method is, of course, like we've just mentioned here, an increase in tax rate. Where can we see that? We can see that from the red to the yellow point. As when we increase tax rate, we get an increase in tax revenue from red to purple. But now, what is another method we can use to increase tax revenue? And that is from blue to purple. What we can do is actually decrease the tax rate, and as we can see, tax revenue increases from here to now here. So we get a massive increase in tax revenue. So there's actually two methods we can use to increase tax revenue. So if you wanted to, for one paragraph, you could talk about an increase in tax rate, and for a second paragraph, you could talk about a decrease in tax rate and how that would increase then the quantity of tax revenue. But also, since this question, of course, we need the evaluation marks, it's asking us to give reference to extract C. So let's have a quick peek over extract C. So what is extract C talking about? Is options for UK tax rises in the future. Okay, so it lists 3 different types of options for raising additional tax revenue. So very related to the question, and I think this will provide lots of applications. So this should be all your application marks secure. So we can increase council tax on houses, we can give a one-off wealth tax, we can increase corporation tax. So that pretty much secures my thinking now, my plan. I'm 100% going to do paragraph on increasing corporation tax. Why? Since, of course, there's going to be lots of application in this little section. As you can see, UK's corp tax increased to 25%, still the lowest rate in the G7, but it will raise tax revenue 17.2 billion in 2025-2026. Another good figure about the G7, the UK has the second worst productivity in the G7 after the 2008 financial crisis. The only country behind us is Japan, and the reason why Japan is so unproductive is because their population is very, very aging, very, very old, not aging. And that's one of the biggest contributing factors to our current account deficit and a persistent current account deficit. But that is another topic, so we will not go any more in depth with that. But yeah, let's get started with this 12-mark question. So this paragraph isn't going to be the most developed chain of analysis since there's not really much to speak about here. And that is the reason why I really wanted to include VAT, since VAT has quite much, you can add quite a lot more depth to VAT than you can add for corporation tax. But how would I word the paragraph on corporation tax? So one method the UK government could use to increase tax revenue is increase the rate of corporation tax. E.g, the UK government in 2023 increased the top rate of UK corporation tax from 19% it was to 25%, and then I'll just literally quote this figure. We still have the lowest rate in the G7, but it will raise 17.2 billion in 2025 to 2026. And then with my chain of analysis, I would just say corporation tax is a tax on a firm's profits. If the rate of corporation tax increases, it means firms will pay a larger percentage of their profits in taxes, thus leading to an increase in tax revenue. And that is literally the whole chain of analysis, and that is why you can understand why a lot of students pick the decrease in tax rate paragraphs instead, since it's a lot easier to develop a longer, just a lot more chains of analysis paragraph. So decreasing corporation tax, the main thing it's going to do is incentivize FDI, incentivize foreign firms. Why? Since if foreign firms are now looking into the UK, are looking to invest into the UK is a more lucrative thing to invest into. Why? Since when they invest into the UK, since the rates of corporation tax are lower, it means they will make more profit, since less of their profit is being taken away in tax. And if more firms are investing into the UK, yes, we have a decrease in our tax rate, but if there's more firms in the UK, the quantity of firms will mean that we're actually making more tax revenue. So you could say by decreasing the tax rate, we're going to get an increase in corporation tax revenue, but that's not where the chain of analysis ends here. You can then talk about how does FDI also affect a country. It's going to lead to improvements in infrastructure, since they invest into the infrastructure, and then things like when a foreign firm invests into the UK, they have to hire UK workers. They have to hire domestic workers. Thus, if they're hiring domestic workers, it's going to lead to more workers being paid, increase in disposable income, thus meaning the government will receive also an increase in tax revenue. It means the government will also receive an increase in income tax revenue. So meaning we have an increase in corporation tax and an increase in income tax. So now going even further with that, if these individuals now have a disposable income, they have money, they can spend it, it's going to lead to an increase in another tax revenue, which is VAT. Since why? They're spending on more goods and services, and of course, VAT is a flat rate, it's 20% on each good and service, and since we're buying more goods and services, since we have more money, it means there's also going to be an increase in VAT tax revenue. So by the government decreasing corporation tax, you can link in all those different types of taxes and develop a really substantiated chain of analysis. So of course, this is why planning is so important, since you can write the exact same paragraph on increased corporation tax and not pick up many marks for your chain of analysis. We could do the same paragraph for decreasing tax rates, and there's so much more chain of analysis. There's so many better links that 100% I believe you should there do the decrease in tax revenue paragraph. But we'll go through evaluations for them both just to make sure whatever paragraph you did, we'll cover the evaluations for it. So firstly, increase in tax revenue. Of course, we're going to use the Laffer Curve to evaluate. And what would I say and how would I word it? I'd say, however, in evaluation, this depends on the UK's position on its Laffer Curve. As if the UK is at the purple position, whatever you want to label it, if you want to do it in the exam, I'd probably just label it like A or like B, C, whatever you want to label it. But in this scenario, it's the purple point. So the way I would word it is, however, in evaluation, an increase in corporation tax, increase in the government's tax revenue depends on the UK's position on its Laffer Curve. As if the UK is originally at position purple, X, or whatever you want to call it, an increase in tax rate is actually going to move us towards this point, and it's going to therefore lead to a decrease in tax revenue. Thus, increase in tax rates too far will actually do the opposite effect and decrease tax revenue. As you can talk about why these unintended effects are happening, since if they increase corporation tax too far, it leads to disincentivizing firms, as the firms are thinking too much of our profits are being taken away, let's just either stop producing or move to another country, thus meaning that there's actually going to be a decrease in tax revenue since these firms may move out, etc, etc. Another great evaluation point, and a really specific one to corporation tax, is saying, however, in evaluation, an increase in the tax revenue depends on corporation tax being tiered. So essentially, there's different tiers of corporation tax. So even though the headline figure is saying that corporation tax in the UK has increased to 25%, that is not entirely true. So essentially, before 2023, I think it was August 2023, the UK's corporation tax was 19%, and it was 19% for all firms. But in 2023, what they did, they increased corporation tax, the highest band of corporation tax, to 25%. But what that actually means, there's now two tiers of corporation tax. So firms making under £50,000 of profit, they still pay the 19%. whereas firms making over £50,000 worth of profit, they pay 25%. So the way you could word this evaluation point, as I've written here, however in evaluation, an increase in tax revenue depends on corporation tax being tiered. As now, it depends on the distribution and the portfolio of our firms in the UK. As for example, if pretty much all our firms in the UK are small firms making less than £50,000 worth of profit, this will mean, even though we've increased the highest band of income tax, of corporation tax, so the top band has increased, if most of the firms are small firms, they're receiving the same rate of corporation tax, thus meaning we're going to see no significant increase in the rates of corporation tax. So essentially I've written out that evaluation point, but corporation tax actually increasing tax revenue depends on the demographic of UK firms, and just for the sake of this question, just for the sake of this evaluation point, we're saying that if all firms in the UK are small firms, even if we increase that top rate, we're actually going to see no increase in tax revenue. That is the evaluation box, so I've given you 2 points there for an increase in tax rate. Let's move on to the opposite side, which is a decrease in tax rate, and more specifically, a decrease in corporation tax. How would I evaluate this? And this is a classic mistake students make. Students will always use the Laffer Curve for an increase in tax rate. However, they forget you can also use the Laffer Curve to evaluate a decrease in tax rate. And how can we show that? So it's just using different points now. So of course we're saying a decrease in tax rate is going to lead, so a decrease in corporation tax rate is going to lead to an increase in tax revenue due to several effects. But Laffer Curve can evaluate that, can show a limitation of that. As for example, if we decrease tax rate from the purple to the red point, what is going to happen to tax revenue? Tax revenue decreases from T1, we can say, to now T2. So by actually decreasing tax rate, as we would expect, we get a decrease in tax revenue. And again, you can just word it the exact same way. However, in evaluation, this depends on the UK's position on its Laffer Curve, as if the UK is at point X and it decreases its tax rate, it will actually lead to a fall in the tax revenue as it moves towards position Y, the red circle, whatever you want to call it. Also, even more specifically, so we talked about the main chain of analysis was based on the assumption that a decrease in corporation tax is going to lead to an increase in FDI. But that's a great point to therefore evaluate. You say, however, in evaluation, this depends on whether a decrease in corporation tax will lead to an increase in FDI. As we know, there's several factors which contribute to firms moving into a country. As for example, one massive factor could be wage costs. As even though there's lower corporation tax, the UK has very high wage costs and high non-wage costs. So for example, we have really high working conditions. For example, like even builders cannot step on the top legally, cannot step on the top step of a ladder, as it's against working regulations. And then we have a very high minimum wage. So those factors could, even though we have a decrease in tax revenue, could stop new firms entering the UK, thus meaning all the positive effects we mentioned of an increase in FDI will not happen, thus obviously limiting and working as a really good evaluation point. And this goes back to the simple tips I give in my evaluation video. It's the biggest video on my channel, you can probably find it quite easily, but I just state that to evaluate, you need to read through your chain of analysis and just look for any assumptions you've made, as those assumptions act as really good specific evaluation points. As if you can question the assumption, you question the entire rest of the chain of analysis, and that's all economics literally is. You constantly, in evaluation, question the assumption, and it works as a really good evaluation point. And that is enough to get you 12 out of 12 marks on that question.